You hope to leave this courtroom today knowing your father's identity so he can walk you down the aisle at your wedding.
My grandmother used to get awkward looks and she would say stuff to people.
If one of two men we've tested for paternity is your biological father, you and another man during the time you dated, you hope you are her biological father. He claims he was shocked just a few months ago. Miss Kelly showed up at his doorstep and broke the news to him that
when I was 2, my grandparents started raising me, and I noticed that I was different. So not having that male influence in my life, I started to act out, get in trouble at school and all kind of stuff. And she told me that there was a chance of 2 guys. She took me to meet her ex-boyfriend, and I also met Mr. Duncan. And he's always opened his doors to me, him and his wife. He's always wanted me to be his.
Oh, I was happy. I was proud. I was proud, you know, to have a look, you know, to have a child. She was living with a guy. She was living with a guy, but she was a nice looking girl and I was a little bit older, and I'm trying to bring her over to my side, but she's living with another guy. I've been hoping 24 years. I've been hoping the same thing, and I only had one mustard seed. That's all I got, is one.
This case unfolds in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, where identity, biology, and the long-broken definition of fatherhood collide with the reforming language of law and justice. The individuals present are not merely visitors. They are witnesses to DNA test revelations, to fragile family ties snapping under legal weight, and to the universal fear that once a test is taken, there is no way to walk back from scientific truth. The mother is there searching for clarity, the alleged fathers are there defending dignity, and the child, grown yet emotionally suspended, is listening to every legal term as if it decides life, belonging, and history. Judge Lauren Lake represents the line between emotional truth and recorded legal truth, and her courtroom becomes a podcast-worthy moment of intensity, similar to the game-changing Attorney podcast and the Divorce Course podcast, where outcomes do not bend for sentiment. What unfolds is not a scene, but a full legal description of what happens when the relationship between law and justice is forced into daylight under recorded oath. Inside the courtroom, the mother stands guarded by memory and guilt, acknowledging mistakes but also insisting on closure. Judge Lauren Lake questions her with controlled tone, not accusatory, not sympathetic, but judicial. DNA tests, she states, are not emotional instruments. They are legal evidence capable of invoking adverse inference in Evidence Act considerations if withheld or misrepresented. The gallery hears this as a reminder that human regret cannot outrun genetic proof. The alleged fathers face forward, not with theatrical denial, but with the quiet panic of men whose entire self-identity could be shifted by a printed page of diagnostics. One believes he has always been the emotional father, though science may remove that title. Another fears having the legal and child support obligations imposed by a system where sentiment is irrelevant once DNA closes the argument. Judge Lauren Lake demands respect for both possibilities, reinforcing that the concept of justice in jurisprudence means fairness not only to the child, but to the accused. When the court examines testimony, names are read into record with precision. The mother recounts her past without embellishment, youthful error, a complicated timeline, and decades of emotional distance from truth. It is the type of familial unraveling that reminds listeners of Celebrate Recovery testimonies, not in spiritual confession, but in human accountability. Judge Lauren Lake ensures that the courtroom does not fall into emotional persuasion. She emphasizes that the evidence stage in divorce case-style proceedings, though this is not technically divorce, still applies in principle. A claim must be proven, not assumed. The alleged father who has always believed in love over biology listens with shifting breath, acknowledging that while DNA may deny him, affection once made him a parent in his own understanding. Yet the court does not validate emotional titles, it validates scientific ones. Another alleged father, less emotionally connected, waits for official verification. He reflects not on years of emotional parenting, but rather on immediate shock, similar to cheating stories where truth arrives abruptly and displaces memory. His testimony carries none of the warmth of adoption stories' full episodes, but instead the stunned confusion of a man who is told he might have become a father without ever being informed. Judge Lauren Lake recognizes this imbalance. She clarifies that while reluctance is understandable, refusal will not rewrite biological truth if scientific results align. At this moment, the courtroom breathes differently, not a pause but a silent calculation of identity, rights, and state-recognized paternity. As the questions deepen, the mother is pressed for clarity of timeline. She is neither dramatic nor evasive, just exhausted by a life built on unresolved truth. She agrees that her daughter deserves legal fatherhood, not suspicion, not rotating rumors, not whispered names. Judge Lauren Lake acknowledges her honesty, yet reminds the court that unverified belief cannot function where the legal apparatus requires proof. DNA results, she states, carry the final interpretation that human memory cannot amend. This aligns with documentary-style legal analysis similar to what listeners hear when Truth Changes Everything podcast episodes deconstruct how families fracture under sworn testimony. The child, now an adult, watches with a composed but unsettled demeanor. She stands not as evidence but as the consequence of historical uncertainty. Her pain is not performed but spoken in the request for identity, moral grounding, and the ability to move forward. She wants the simple privilege of knowing who belongs to her in both emotional and legal forms. Judge Lauren Lake confirms that the courtroom exists precisely for this, to finalize what biology began and what secrecy delayed. In that moment, the entire legal audience understands that this case is not only about paternity. It is about the relationship between law and justice when they are forced to coexist rather than conflict. The potential father who expresses love without proof listens to the ruling structure with grace. His perspective reflects the essence of those transformative parental narratives featured in recovery and reconciliation programs. Except here the court controls pace, language, and closure. He admits that people regret taking DNA tests when they hope love will override biology, yet he does not revolt against scientific truth. Judge Lauren Lake appreciates this dignity, reminding the courtroom that gratitude for truth is the core principle of jurisprudence. Whether he is declared the father or not, he is instructed to respect the decision made under evidentiary purity. When the legal clerk enters carrying sealed results, both alleged fathers shift posture. The courtroom energy becomes heavy with anticipation rather than accusation. No scene is described. Instead, the legal atmosphere is defined through constitutional responsibility. Judge Lauren Lake reiterates that this moment is not merely clinical, it is precedent-driven. DNA diagnostics, once opened, will define responsibilities, eliminate guesswork, and finalize emotional limbo. The results, she clarifies, do not honor preference, nor do they bend to the nostalgia of the man who believed himself a father for decades. They honor lineage as verified by scientific conclusion. Thus, the court prepares for final confirmation. No one speaks. The finality of genetics overrules conversational conflict. This is what adverse inference in Evidence Act warns against. When individuals resist truth, law compels it. Yet today no one resists. Every participant, including the judge, acknowledges that truth, no matter how painful, is a restoration. As the courtroom settles into legal stillness, Judge Lauren Lake continues the process not as a performer of justice, but as its interpreter. The sealed envelope remains untouched for a moment longer as she reiterates that this is not a story of parental affection alone, not a broadcast moment for emotional reaction, but a legal determination formed through verified diagnostics. Her tone is firm, yet deeply aware of human consequence. She reminds everyone that familial love, personal memory, and years of belief do not operate above the jurisdiction of evidence. The courtroom acknowledges this truth in solemn silence. The DNA test, the same test that people regret taking once the outcome disrupts their hopes, is about to deliver clarity that even the most persuasive testimony cannot override. The alleged father who lived with paternal certainty prepares himself not for victory but for verdict. He breathed fatherhood for decades, but now stands at the edge of legal elimination or confirmation. This moment is precisely the intersection referenced when legal scholars define the relationship between law and justice. Feelings may form family bonds, but justice requires that those bonds withstand scientifically established identity. Judge Lauren Lake underscores that even heartfelt claims cannot substitute for genetic proof. She moves the court forward in full composure, demonstrating what listeners often hear in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast. Law does not bend because one side suffered more, or loved harder, or believed longer. The courtroom environment remains calm, but internally each individual experiences a collision of expectations. The mother continues to hold her posture with constrained remorse, acknowledging that her past decisions left not just emotional holes but legal consequences. She does not dispute the need for DNA confirmation. She accepts it as overdue accountability. Judge Lauren Lake confirms that this acceptance matters, but she also resets the focus. The law does not reward confession with leniency. It rewards truth with resolution. The mother is not asked to relive her mistakes, only to provide the documented context within which the court must now deliver certainty. The second alleged father listens with the distance of someone who only recently learned he may have been biologically connected. His presence is not rooted in parental memory, but in legal discovery. He reflects the clinical neutrality found in podcast episodes where evidence trumps sentimentality. Judge Lauren Lake acknowledges that while he may not have been present emotionally, he is bound by genetic truth if the results determine so. The court's role is not to evaluate his emotional absence, but to determine whether biology demanded presence. Justice, she states, does not punish unknowing. It punishes avoidable refusal once truth is discovered. The adult child at the center of this legal definition stands in still awareness. Her identity has lived in ambiguity long enough. She does not need paternal stories or nostalgic recollections. She needs legal recognition, the authority to complete her biography without speculation. Judge Lauren Lake articulates this necessity with judicial clarity. Identity is a legal right, not a request, and this court is mandated to protect it. In this space, there is no space for partial truth. Her request is treated with the seriousness afforded to any citizen seeking final resolution under state-recognized paternity considerations. The emotional father's internal conflict is deeply evident in legal posture, though not in dramatic presentation. He has spent years believing in a child he may not biologically share, which demonstrates the principle often highlighted in Celebrate Recovery testimonies. That commitment is not always connected to correctness. He stands prepared to accept whatever conclusion the diagnostics reveal, but Judge Lauren Lake ensures he understands that affection, though admirable, cannot legally override DNA. His history with the child is acknowledged respectfully, but the court cannot transform emotional memory into biological certitude. Judge Lauren Lake then transitions into procedural clarity typical of the evidence stage in divorce case format. First, the sworn testimonies are identified. Then, the timelines are reaffirmed. Finally, the legal responsibility is placed not on memory but on measurable fact. She describes the DNA results not as punishment or reward, but as the instant legal conversion from uncertainty to codified truth. This is where jurisprudential principle meets scientific finality, the precise moment in which the concept of justice in jurisprudence is fulfilled without theatrical interference. The courtroom does not seek a reconciliation of feelings, but the alignment of identity with genetics. Adoption stories' full episodes often lean on emotional expansion, but this proceeding is the opposite: a narrowing, a certainty, an irreversible identification. Judge Lauren Lake clarifies that once results are read, the law does not entertain emotional objections. DNA is, as she states, non-narrative truth. It exists without dialogue, without memory, without persuasion. It is the final form of evidence. When the judge signals for the clerk to approach with documentation, it is done in procedural rhythm, not dramatization. Each page, each signature, each diagnostic number represents the weight of state-recognized biological connection. Scientific verification now steps forward, and years of speculation step back. The gallery feels the shift. Even those with no involvement in the case understand that the core of the human struggle presented today will either be resolved or fractured permanently by two words: is or is not. Judge Lauren Lake prepares everyone once more for the legal gravity of what she is about to declare. She states that this verdict is not a conclusion to emotional history, but a correction to factual identity. It does not erase familial experiences. It simply defines biological truth. She reminds the parties that DNA tests are often the point people regret taking when hope outlasts reality, but this regret cannot rewrite the need for closure. This courtroom, she explains, exists for that closure. Every participant now holds the same breath. The emotional father stops anticipating and begins accepting. The second alleged father braces for identity he never prepared for. The mother reaches for resolve instead of defense. The adult child stands ready to replace lifelong wondering with legal knowing. Judge Lauren Lake lifts the sealed envelope, signaling that the burden of uncertainty has reached its statutory end. The moment of final disclosure arrives not with spectacle but with judicial gravity. Judge Lauren Lake holds the results with the same measured authority she would use in a Supreme Court child support ruling, where legal lineage becomes legally enforceable responsibility. She reiterates that regardless of emotional allegiance, the results define biology, and biology in this courtroom is binding. There is no debate, no appeal to sentiment, no extension of what-if thinking. The child, now an adult, stands not as a witness to memory, but as the rightful recipient of genetic certainty. Every person present recognizes that whether embraced or regretted, the DNA test is now the sole instrument of truth. Judge Lauren Lake reminds the courtroom of the foundational rule: science does not respond to emotional negotiation. She references the principle often analyzed in legal commentary podcasts, such as Truth Changes Everything podcast, that once evidence crosses into admissible certification, it becomes the only narrative the court is permitted to uphold. She also reinforces that the relationship between law and justice manifests here in direct alignment. Justice is not punitive today, it is corrective. The task is not to assign fault, but to assign identity where it has been suspended for years. The mother listens with acceptance rather than defense. She acknowledges that the truth, though delayed, remains necessary. She understands that no explanation, no backstory, no apology substitutes for scientific finality. Judge Lauren Lake nods at her composed state, but clarifies that acceptance does not influence outcome. Evidence alone does. Like the careful commentary heard on the Divorce Course podcast, she reiterates that personal regret does not weaken legal obligation. It simply contextualizes it. The courtroom is not assembled to mourn what happened in youth, but to legally reveal what belongs in adulthood. The alleged father, who spent decades believing in emotional paternity, closes his eyes briefly, not to question the results but to prepare himself for them. This is where law meets the private ache often heard in Celebrate Recovery testimonies. But Judge Lauren Lake is firm. Emotional investment, while respected, is not the determinant of hereditary truth. The child may have experienced love from him, but the court is not a forum that certifies affection. It certifies genetics. She instructs that once results are read, there will be no reinterpretation, no narrative adjustment, no post-verdict emotional debate. Legal closure is final closure. The second alleged father, quieter in demeanor, sits upright in anticipation. His position is not built on commitment but on possibility. He embodies the legal posture captured in evidence stage in divorce case proceedings. A party who may gain legal fatherhood solely by DNA, not by memory or choice. Judge Lauren Lake acknowledges his apprehension, noting that legal fatherhood, if assigned, carries obligations beyond emotional preparedness, including potential child support enforcement. She emphasizes again that today is not merely about biological revelation, but the legal conversion that follows it. As she prepares to read the results, Judge Lauren Lake pauses to clarify jurisprudential purpose. She explains that the concept of justice in jurisprudence is not merely moral fairness. It is procedural fairness governed by evidence. DNA tests cannot be softened or reinterpreted based on who feels more deserving. They are, she states, the final authority where multiple narratives have existed and where memory has failed to serve certainty. Even when people regret taking DNA tests, the legal system does not regret receiving it. Truth, especially biological truth, strengthens the framework of justice. The daughter's expression remains steady, not untouched by emotion but strengthened by resolve. She understands that the result will not restore childhood or rewrite adolescence. It will simply remove ambiguity. It will transform identity from a shifting sentence into a documented fact. This is all she has asked of the court, not affection, not apology, not allegiance, just truth. Judge Lauren Lake validates this. She states that citizens have the right to know their origins, not as rumor but as statute. The court clerk hands over verified documentation. The room shifts into the same intensity found in high-level legal podcasts such as the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where outcome is pure law, unsoftened by interpretation. Judge Lauren Lake opens the document carefully, emphasizing that results are presented exactly as issued. No additions, no narrative, no speculative commentary. The room, though silent, carries the weight of every unspoken memory, every hidden assumption, every whispered name that shaped the adult child's entire identity. The results, when read, release the courtroom from uncertainty. Judge Lauren Lake articulates them clearly, professionally, without emotional coloring. She announces the name that science confirms as biological father. The declaration is not theatrical, not softened, not dramatized. It is the legal resolution years in the making. The child receives her truth. The mother bows her head, not in shame but in completion. The emotional father exhales, accepting his position not as erased love but as love redefined. Deep, valid, but not biological. Judge Lauren Lake recognizes his presence with respect, but reminds him that law cannot assign parentage based on devotion. Biology is the only standard in this proceeding. She then addresses the verified father, informing him of his status not as possibility but as legal fact. She explains that with biological identification comes legal recognition and responsibility. If child support becomes relevant, it is no longer something argued but something enforceable under state statute. She notes that paternity verdicts carry profound legal weight, far beyond the emotional reaction that might follow. He nods, acknowledging his newly confirmed identity, no longer estimated but documented. Judge Lauren Lake closes by framing the decision not as tragedy or triumph, but as the final installation of truth. She states that DNA does not heal the past but clarifies it, and that clarity is the first requirement of justice. She reminds the courtroom that while multiple narratives existed across years, only one genetically verifiable truth could be upheld today. The court, having fulfilled its duty, transitions back into procedural neutrality. No apologies are demanded, no resentments validated. The law has spoken. The adult child leaves not with restored time but with restored certainty. The mother leaves not with guilt but with completion. The emotional father leaves not dismissed but redefined. The biological father leaves not shocked but newly bound. Judge Lauren Lake leaves the bench exactly as she began, not to comfort, not to dramatize, but to declare. Because in her courtroom, truth does not merely exist, it is enforced, recorded, and never reversed.